All right, welcome folks. This is the recording for the texturing 1 for Maya in my game design class. So today we're going to be using this UV1 Rubik's UV. Rubik's Cubes are quite simple for a lot of concepts, so that's why we use Rubik's Cubes. We're also going to be referring to these notes where we're going to be tying in some of the stuff we've already talked about and expanding upon it, so we're familiar with the concept of a material. How can we use materials to expand beyond just adding direct color to things? And then we're going to be talking about this new thing called the UV mapping process and how we use tools that we already have to move, scale, and rotate shells that we make in our UV mapping process. And so we'll be getting into all of that. So let's start with getting our file. So like I said, you need this zip file. You will have to uncompress it if you are on Windows. You'll just need to right click it and extract it. Extract here, extract to locate whatever. If you're on Mac, you should just be able to double click it. Inside you will find a Maya project folder. So welcome back to Maya. So here's a project folder. Essentially all you need to do is open up Maya. Go to set your project, so file, set project as always. Find wherever that thing got extracted at, so in my case it's in my drop folder. We'll set this project here to that folder, and I will know things work when I go to File, Open Scene, and what do you know? Hold on, I'm going to move it over here. Now my UV Rubik is right here. Great. So let's open it up. Here's a Rubik's Cube. Great. So, what we're going to do is use the texture file I have provided to you to texture this, okay? So to do so, we are going to assign a material and then assign a texture to the material. So let's look at the notes. So materials, as we're familiar with, Lamberts and blends. The actual use of a material is that it will assign textures onto faces based upon their UV maps, which we'll be talking about in a second. You're familiar with using materials just to add a solid color. So you can assign texture files, images, into the material so that you can assign that picture to whatever the material is assigned to. And texture is an image file assigned to a material that defines its appearance. So typically we'll be talking about color, bump mapping, and spec. So we'll be getting into this stuff the next few weeks. So for today, we're only worried about color. Reminder, so we have talked about this before, but reminder, files entering Maya as textures live in source images. So you'll notice in that project that I gave you, in the source images folder is a Rubik.targa file. Great. So, to connect a texture to a material, we use a file node. So I'll cover this in a second. So let's go ahead and start by assigning a material. So again, reminder, you would just select your object, go down to assign favorite material, and choose the material type you want to use. So I'll use a blend. All right. And so we want to assign a file node to color, and that file node will link in our texture. So it goes material, has a file node connected to it, and that file node connected contains the texture that we want to use. So tiered. So let's start with clicking this little checkered box. And again, I want to point out on the notes, I got all the steps here. So within your material, click the checkered box icon for the right channel. So in our case, color. From the node menu, we want to select a file node. So I'm going to select file. It's the fourth one down. This will open up, and it's asking me, hey, what file would you like to connect to your material? You'll also see that your object became darker gray. So then you just need to click this folder icon here. And what's great about this is that it will automatically be trying to look in your current project's source images folder. Wow, it's almost like I just told you that's where they should be. So we'll grab that. And here you go. So pretty ugly Rubik's Cube. The last step, of course, is to press 6 to display textures. We've already talked about 4, 5, and 6 before, but as a reminder, 6 displays textures. Okay. So we have now assigned a material to our object. We connected a file node and assigned a texture into that file node. All right, so why does this look like a clown cube? So what's going on with this is, let me open up our UV editor, which will be, come on. There we go. So this is the UV editor. This is a workspace that we'll be using. So typically these two things are separated, so I'm just going to pull those apart so you can see that. So here's your UV editor workspace and your toolkit. And so I just want to point out basically what this is, this UV space, is just a 2D representation of your 3D object. So let me go ahead and just make a cube here, and you'll see this cube has a very similar UV layout at its default as our Rubik's Cube, because no UV maps have been created for this beyond the default UV maps. So let's look at some vocab. So UV mapping, that is the process that we're about to start to do texturing. UV mapping is the process of creating a 2D shell from our 3D faces. So keep in mind that the UV space is separate than space XYZ. UV, XYZ. They're related, but not contiguous. They're not the same. So the method you want to follow, get this in your head. Select, map, move, unfold. Select, map, move, unfold. Now, we are not going to need to do any unfolding on our assignment today. We'll be talking about that on another lesson. So select, map, move, unfold. So in our case, we are going to use planar mapping for a lot of what we do today. So what is a planar map? Selected faces are mapped into a UV shell from a chosen axis. So essentially, what you need to understand about this term UV shell, the UV shell is simply the 2D representation of a face from the 3D space. Each face has exactly one equivalent shell in the UV space. So one face, one shell. One face, one shell. Now, I do want to point out though, a vertex may be represented by multiple UV points. So one point in the 3D space may be 1, 2, 3 or more points in your UV space. So keep that in mind. Now, our UV editor is where all of this gets done. I'm going to reorganize this stuff. This is not in the right order. So so again, we just have our UV editor up from the UV menu at the top here. Sorry, my zoom buttons are in the way, but you don't see that on the you do see it on the recording. UV menu, and then it's this option right here at the top. Zoom, I swear to God, man. So, all right, so let's actually talk about what we're doing here. So I have my shape here. Be careful about where dragging these things around. It wants to dock onto things. So here's my cube. It has the texture assigned to it. These are all of the shells for my object. And so what we're going to do is, I'm going to use, if you right click and hold in here, so we have our classic selection modes, face, edge, vertex, but also you predominantly are going to be using UV shell or UV while you're working in the UV space. So UV shell is essentially the equivalent of object mode for UVs. So I'm going to switch into UV shell mode. I'm going to grab this whole shell and I'm going to move it over here, and so you can see how that's mostly making my texture black. Some of it's getting colored white or yellow, and that's because this texture tiles infinitely, but that's for another lesson. And so again, I'm in my UV shell selection mode. I selected my shell in the UV space. Our tools work the exact same as they do in our 3D space. So move, scale, rotate. I'm going to scale this down to fit into this black space here. Okay, so now all of my Rubik's Cube is black. Okay, and you'll see why that's going to be good for me in a second. Let me delete this. I don't want this here. All right, so now what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to take my UV editor and I'm going to take my UV toolkit and grab the top of it, and I'm going to dock it onto the side of my UV editor because I don't like when it floats around like that. And then you got to be careful when you're moving the UV editor on your screen because it wants to dock onto things. I hate it. Okay, so now let me move this off to the side because you don't really need to see the UV toolkit right now. So I'm going to start by going into my face selection mode, and I'm going to grab these 9 faces on top. And so again, as usual, we're only worried about the big faces facing outwards. So I have my 9 faces selected on top. I'm going to just double check it and accidentally get anything else. And so going back to the notes, we're going to create a planar map for these faces. So selected faces are mapped into a UV shell from the chosen axis. Select faces to map, then open UV, planar, and options. So, whoops, Maya. UV, planar, options, and that's going to give you this little box here. So we are going to, in this case, if I press my move tool as a reminder, so which direction will we best see these faces from? So if I try and project this from the X, and I'll hit apply here, you can see it's just giving me flat lines in my UV editor. Not useful. What about from the Z axis? Same stuff. Project it again. Oh, whoops, that's not what I meant to do, but whatever. Project closes the box. So anyway, so you can see flat, again, not useful. What we want to do is project these faces from the Y where we can best see them. So project from the Y, project, and you can see now they're all projected. They're also, just because they fill the entire 0 to 1, we'll talk about, they have all these colors. You're just going to scale these down and move them over a single color. So now the top faces are all red. I'm going to go down here and do the bottom now. So let me click off, make sure I don't have anything selected. And let me make sure I select all 9 of these faces on the bottom. We'll do our UV, planar, and options. And so again, not from the X, not from the Z, but from the Y, I'm going to project these. You do not want to project the ones that face the same direction at the same time on this assignment. In some aspects, it will be very useful for you, but not for today's assignment. So I'll make these orange. It doesn't matter what colors you make them. Okay, so moving along. We're going to grab these 9 faces here. Again, go to my planar options. And looking at our move tool, we'll just remind ourselves not Y, not X, Z, because I'm looking right at it, project. And again, you just got to scale these shells down and fit them within a single color. Great. Again, in this case, not from the Y, not from the Z, on the X. Project, scale them down, fit them in another box. Oh, you know what? Make sure I have everything deselected before I start selecting things. We're going to, again, just go to planar and options. This case, it's not the Y, not the X, but the Z. And again, if you ever make a mistake, there can only be one copy of a shell, or of a face can only have one copy as a shell. So just remake the shell, reproject it. It's like it never happened. All right, last one. So then I just need to boom, boom, boom. Let me make sure I have everything deselected actually. And UV, planar and options. This is not the Y, not the Z, but on the X. Project. Scale it down. And so you'll notice now that we've pulled all of these faces out, I'm left with this big ol' long tic-tac-toe grid, which basically means that all of the faces that are on this shell, so basically all the faces in the gaps, all the faces that are on the side of these are now going to be remaining textured black. And so now I have all of my outward facing faces colored, and I have all of my gaps colored with black. So that's all you need to do for this. You're going to file. When you're done, you'll save this. File, save scene as, and we'll call this, in my case, I'm going to call this UV Rubik demo. You can just save over it, and so you'll give me your completed Rubik's Cube with the appropriately done UVs. You don't need to give me back the texture because I have your texture. I just need the Maya file from you. So that's what you'll be submitting. Your completed Maya file, your Rubik's Cube model, or object rather. You need to edit its UVs so that the UV shell for all the gaps and stuff are in the black area. And then as you do your projections of these 9 faces, moving those to fit into these 6 discrete colors on the texture. So that is the assignment. You want to go through your steps of assigning a material, connecting a file node to the texture, and then when you have your Rubik's Cube with the texture applied, open up your UV editor, grab the faces you want and planar map them, and then move the shells around so that you can get them in the right spots. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you for watching.